Hi, this is the presentation regarding word study information that we are going to start working on with our case study students at Bowie. Here you will view the presentation and take notes using the Cornell Notes format. Bring those notes to class so that if you need them, you may use them. What happens is for the next couple of weeks for note taking, you are going to have online presentations that you do listen to, watch, and take notes. And then while in class, we're going to practice what you have taken notes over. So this one starts our Words Their Way case study assessments with our students. And I want to give you this presentation as a bit of background before we start talking about the spelling inventory, which will be the next assessment you'll do, and the first one actually that you'll do with your case study student. And then how you build a mini lesson or another lesson based on the results of the spelling inventory. So we'll get started with word study introduction. A word study in itself is a way to teach students about vocabulary. We have to build the phonics skills first so that students understand how letters sound. And then when letters come together to make words, students start recognizing spelling patterns. And from that, then the students start recognizing that words have meaning or vocabulary in this case. So a word study is an integrated way to teach phonics, spelling, and vocabulary to improve a student's reading and writing or literacy skills. Word studies have been demonstrated to improve the orthographic knowledge of children and adolescents, both those who are proficient and those who are struggling. There's a big word there, orthographic. It just means writing knowledge or writing and spelling knowledge. And here is our word. Orthography is the writing system of a language. In our case, we have the alphabet, which are 26 letters. Some are considered vowels and some are consonants. So our orthography is our alphabet or the writing system of language. There is a significant relationship between being able to read well and knowing how to spell the words. And there are stages of spelling that we're going to look at as we talk about the word study and the spelling inventory, and how these development stages of spelling are very closely related to how a student learns to read. Why do we care? Because every student learns differently, and some might struggle with learning letters, letter sounds, the relationship to those letters and sounds and how they make words, and then decoding how those words make meaning. Therefore, then those students will have trouble comprehending what they're reading. Again, if you don't understand the words that you're reading, the whole purpose of reading in itself is to make meaning of that. So if the students are struggling orthographically and developmentally orthographically with that, then they will have trouble reading or comprehending what they're reading. And students usually have trouble with decoding if they have trouble with spelling, and vice versa. So we need to know this, and we need to know how to assess our students and what their spelling level is, so that then we can start building reading comprehension lessons for them. There are shallow orthographies and deep orthographies. These are writing systems that are easy to pronounce and highly regular. Those are shallow orthographies. Those are these relationships that we see that are very transparent. You see the letter T and you know that makes the T sound. That's a shallow orthography. Otherwise, we have deep orthographies, which are letters put together and make different sounds than what you actually see. And our example on the screen is that the F sound, the F sound, or the sound that the letter F makes, that F sound, can be made multiple ways. It can be made with the letter F. When you put a GH together in our orthography, the alphabet can also make the F sound. And then when we put a PH together, also makes the F sound. And in our case, in Texas, just north of Austin, is a town called Pflugerville, where the PF makes the F sound. That would be a very deep orthography, not something that makes sense, not something that pops out at us right away, that is very direct. You might not know that the PH makes the F sound if you are a new language learner, a new English language learner, or just building your knowledge as a student or a child who's building reading knowledge. So you have to explicitly teach those deep orthographies so that students understand that. We'll get to that in just a moment. In orthographic development, research into the development of orthographic knowledge suggests that it proceeds through 3 broad and increasingly complex phases. We start with the alphabetic phase. That's where our kids are learning the alphabet. Not only do they learn the letters and what they look like, but they start learning what the letters sound like. Once the students have the alphabetic principle down, they can start putting those letters together into patterns, and then students start recognizing that when these letters are put together frequently, they make the same sound and can build words and then other words using those same patterns. And then lastly, in orthographic development, of course, we need to know what words mean so that we can comprehend. So we go from individual alphabet and letter sound relationships to patterns that letters create when they are put together, and then the meaning of words. Alphabetic principle is driven by an alphabetic expectation. Sounds within words are matched up with letters in a linear left to right fashion. For example, the example on the screen, you see that the students can hear the letters, so they're able to maybe miss some of the vowels, but in most cases, students can hear those hard consonants. I can tell from that first example that this child is writing or sees the letters, I like my dog. I'm not sure what the second one is. If you're a University of Texas fan, could be hookin'. And then the third one across the screen, that JRUM, is how some kids hear drum. So a student might hear those sounds and write them in orthographic form this way. Aha, chicken. I see that there. When we talk about the pattern stage, the students are more advanced in looking at this conceptually. Spelling does not always work in a strictly left to right fashion, and students start recognizing that patterns of letters work together to represent sounds. In our 3 examples here, a student who hasn't been explicitly taught about the differences in making the A sound in words might spell train, Trane. It's correct the way you would pronounce it, but there are multiple patterns that kids are going to learn that they'll recognize is correct and incorrect when spelling certain words. In this case, Train is what we're looking for, but the child heard that long A and might have been taught the silent E. So you'll recognize, students will understand and start recognizing patterns in those words. And through, THRU, the student may not have learned that OUGH yet, or EW. So it might be a good idea if you saw a student writing where they heard the word through and they had that THR sound down, but they weren't sure of the pattern that follows that. And then way also has another pattern. If you remember, there are two, there's a homophone, way, W-A-Y, and way, W-E-I-G-H. You'd have to teach those two patterns. The A-Y is one pattern because we can make other words with that same pattern. And then the E-I-G-H would be another pattern. And then meaning is where kids start to look at parts of words and identify that those parts have their own meaning and then can define what words mean. Here, children focus on how compound words are created and come to mean what they do, and how base words and affixes combine. Like misspelling. It is misspelled, but in this example, I would say the student understood that MIS being a prefix meant not correct, and then spelled the word spelling. PEEK would be peak, or the peak of the experience. And then congratulate, the student would be taught explicitly, it's almost a sight word, how to spell something like congratulate that has multiple syllables to it. Within these three concepts, within the alphabetic principle concept, the pattern concept, and the meaning concept, then we have multiple levels of spelling development and where we expect our students to be in their spelling ability. This would indicate by grade level, but know that there are many, many, many things that could create a student's inability to spell or GT abilities to spell. So this is not hard and fast, but it's a good idea to think of where your students might be or maybe should be at their particular spelling level. So we have the emergent group, which is usually what we think of as our young babies, like the pre-K and the up to first graders. Letter, name, alphabetic can go from kinder to third grade. This is where the students are recognizing the names of the letters, the sounds of the letters, and they're starting to put those together. Within word pattern, first grade to middle grade, or the middle of fourth grade, is where students are taught and are recognizing those patterns within words that help them spell words. And then the upper grades, fourth and fifth and so on, understand the differences in syllables, being able to manipulate words by adding prefixes and suffixes and so on. And then derivational relations is deeper understanding of manipulating words and understanding base words, manipulating prefixes, suffixes, and so on. Our emergent level kids make letter-like symbols. They might make a B backwards so that a B might look like a D. Their K might be backwards. They're trying to make the letters. They recognize that a letter is a thing, but they may not always do them correctly. These students at this level use letters in their name to spell all kinds of words. So generally, one of the first things a student will learn to spell is their name. And they recognize those letters quickly and quicker than they might some other letters. So you generally see students using a lot of those letters in words that they are trying to spell. A good teaching strategy might be to have a student write out their name and then create a list of 2-letter words with a couple of letters from their names or so on, almost like Boggle. And I think if we haven't played it yet, we're going to play it soon. And here at the emergent level, students may begin to use conventional letters toward the end, as well as conventions of writing, such as directionality. That's where these kids recognize that in English we read from left to right, and what to do at a period, what to do at a question, and so on, question mark, and so on. In the letter name alphabetic stage, the students begin to understand an initial consonant and an ending consonant sound. This is where we start thinking about the CVC words and the CVVC words and so on. Here the students understand vowels, but may become confused as to which vowels to use. And by the end of the letter name alphabetic stage, the students can spell single syllable words conventionally. They've got those single syllable words down. And you would think of the word cat. We generally start with something that simple and identify the phonemes in cat, the letters that make up the word cat, and the students understand then how to manipulate letters, say the beginning letter of the word, to make a different word. Within word level, students are able to use but confuse long vowel patterns like that A-N-E for train. They have, some students have difficulty with the more odd patterns like the I-G-H-T in fight, bright, light, and so on. That's why those are considered sight words in many cases. And then sometimes in this particular spelling level, these kids struggle with the oi sound or diphthongs and need to be explicitly taught when to use the OI, when to use the OY, when to use an OW, and make sure those kids understand the sounds that those letters together make in a diphthong. For syllables and affixes, we're teaching our students double consonanting whenever we add an ending or a suffix to a word, like shopping should have the double P before you add the ing. These students are learning when to drop an E at the end of a word if we're adding a suffix to the word. These students are learning when to drop the Y and add IES to pluralize a word. And then these students are learning the appropriate spelling for prefixes and suffixes. Prefixes seem to be a little simpler, but in our example here, the word is opposition, and they've got the sound of the spelling down, but if you think of the word opposition, it's a difficult one to spell. OPPOSITION. And in this case, you'd have to teach that suffix as TION very explicitly. In derivational relations, these students are learning what to do with vowels, criticize, opposition, opposition. So they hear opposition, but they have to learn that it's opposition. Criticize is criticize when you write it. You even have to think of the word again, because we say again with that or kind of a schwa sound at the beginning, but it begins with the letter A. So this is where some very specific experience, lots of exposure to these kinds of words and practice with these words helps students understand derivational relations. And students are learning how to use relationships to words to spell words with common roots. Transportation, teaching students roots like port means to carry and trans means across. So transportation, a kid could figure out if they knew those little parts, when you put it together, it means to carry across, and so on. This is where we talk about etymology and the root of the formation of words. So a word study in itself is actually a process in which students categorize words and pictures within their developmental spelling level through the use of word sorts. Sorts are spelling, vocabulary, and phonics activities that use categorizations to reveal essential differences and similarities among words. In sorts, students match words or pictures to specific keywords. And sorts allow students to observe consistent patterns in English orthography, such as the CVCE words usually result in a long vowel sound. I will show you what these look like momentarily. How does a word study work? You first will do a spelling inventory and you'll analyze the level of spelling knowledge your student has, whether it's emergent, within word pattern, derivational relations, or what. Once you know their level, you would select a few vocabulary words from each reading selection related to a spelling or reading pattern which the students might use but confuse. Then you would engage the student in a word sort or a word study activity so that they start recognizing what you're trying to do. They start recognizing these patterns that you're trying to help them build. And then you can keep doing word studies with them. You can change them up. You can increase the rigor. You can increase the level of vocabulary, and also change around your students if you have them work with other students, if you have them do word studies or word sorts in a station, or if you use this as part of your guided reading lessons. We do word studies to teach students through exploration how to examine words in order to discover the regularities, patterns, and rules of English orthography needed to read and spell. And we want to increase students' reading, spelling, and vocabulary knowledge of specific words. And I like to say here, sight words, because a lot of what we're teaching when we're working in word study and word sorts are words that are just unusual and words that need a little additional attention because there isn't necessarily a clear orthography. These are mostly the deep orthographies that we're talking about when we do word study or word sorts. You can do picture sorts, word sorts, open sorts, closed sorts, and so on. For the purpose of our course, what you're going to work on are word sorts. And if you see here on the screen, a word sort divides words into contrasting categories according to the purpose. And that's the purpose of what you're teaching or what your student needs to know. A word sort might look something like this. For the image on the upper left-hand side with the short vowel U and then the long vowel U, and there's a column for oddball. You see three different columns there. Underneath those columns, you see a list of words, and what your student would do is, well, first, you would have those words cut out and the columns situated so that the student could move those words into the correct column. And because these letters show the phonics symbol of the sounds, then this word sort is going to be where the students are looking for the word that makes that sound. And they're going to put that word in the column with the correct sound. For example, the word tube, T-U-B-E, makes the U sound whenever you say it. So I would put it in the second column because the U with the dash over it indicates the U sound. Tube, I would put that in the second column. If I were going to look at the word club, C-L-U-B, the first column is the short U sound, So I would put, or the student would sort club into that first column. And then you might consider put, P-U-T. It doesn't make the sound or the short U sound. It doesn't make the U sound. So I would consider that one an oddball, which even in our orthography is a deeper orthography than some. So I would place the word put in the oddball column in the third column. So you've got lists of words categorized into what you want your student to learn. If you're looking at the second example on this screen, on the right-hand lower side, you would sort the words by its beginning consonant cluster, and in this case is 3 consonants. So you would first express to your students what those consonant clusters were, lay them out in a line or in some way so that the student could then categorize and place the word with the same consonant cluster in the right category. The Words Their Way textbook within the book itself, toward the back of the book, provides you many, many, many examples of word sorts, and they're also broken out into the spelling stage. So you might find a word sort for within word alphabet. You might find a word sort for derivational relations and so on. So that textbook is essential for at least giving you ideas on how you might create a word sort for your case study student once you complete your spelling inventory with them. I'm kind of combining two PowerPoints in one here because you need to know this information specifically for testing purposes, your testing purposes. The TESS exam wants you to understand how to teach reading, and this is part of teaching reading. This might help you when doing your case study, but this is just some more information that I want to share with you about how to work with words. So the term that we're going to focus on, and I mentioned earlier on another slide, but etymology is what we're doing here. We're looking at the history of words and the origins of words. And a lot of the words that we use, you can tell the origin of the word based on parts of the word itself. For example, just looking at the word example, we can tell that X means out. So we know that something is out. We're taking out something. And it goes from Latin all the way into French over time to become a late Middle English word that we now still use. So example has Latin roots, meaning to take out. An example specifically is me taking out something that I want to focus on specifically. French is one of those languages that is deeply rooted in Latin, as well as Spanish and Italian. So if you've got Spanish speakers in your class, it might be good to understand that a lot of the words that those Spanish speakers know and recognize come from a Latin background. So if you're able to know the etymology, you might help yourself in helping a student recognize words in English. I'm not going to show you specifically this clip from the movie Akeelah and the Bee, but I've linked to it here. It is an adorable movie about a young girl who decides she wants to participate in a spelling bee. And this particular scene, or a couple of scenes from the movie, are her, Akeelah, and her coach, who is helping her study for the spelling bee, and he's teaching her how you break big words up into their smaller parts to not only be able to spell them better, but to also identify meaning within the words. I suggest just watching this clip if you have an extra couple of minutes to do so, because it's cute and funny, but it's also very informative for you as a teacher to be able to recognize that these giant words that your students are struggling with, you can help them by helping them recognize how to break down the etymology of those words. When we're looking at words, we are recognizing them in a couple of different ways. We recognize words by sight, we recognize words in context, and we recognize words through analysis of the word itself, and that's looking at the etymology of the word. You've heard about sight words. These are those irregular words that are high frequency enough that you're going to hear and see and use them all the time. You may not even realize that you're using them. These are words that can't be sounded out phonetically or completely, like the word enough. There's that GH making the F sound at the end. Said, we pronounce as SED if we think about the short vowel E, but it's spelled very differently. So sight words are those that are so irregular that we have to teach them explicitly and get students to recognize them automatically. Here's just a list of the first 100 sight words. If you teach kindergarten or first grade, you might see lists like this that you're expected to teach your students, or at least have posted in your classroom so that your students see them. Some of these I don't necessarily agree with. The word old doesn't seem that difficult to spell if it's taught correctly, but okay. When we are recognizing words in context, we're reading something and there might be a word we don't understand. So we use our semantic cue to help us figure out what the word means. We might use the context surrounding the word. Sometimes the author gives us a definition. Sometimes the author gives us an example of that word. There are other things that can help us. There is context that can help us to understand and recognize a word. We think of context clues when we talk about this type of word recognition. You teach context clues at about 3rd and 4th grade. And note that context clues are the things good readers use to find meanings of unknown words. You can use anything from pictures, other words in the sentence that are helper words, or words that you know that look like that word maybe. There might be examples and definitions. There could be some punctuation that would help in context, and there may be a synonym or an antonym involved in the context around that word. And then word analysis is when we are looking at a word we don't know to kind of break it out into its parts to see if we could figure out what it means and how to say it. So we do this in phonics. We do this with multisyllabic words. We can use prefixes and suffixes to analyze words. We can chunk parts of words into its smaller parts. And we can consider the etymology if we are knowledgeable enough about the roots of words. 2 ways we're going to talk about analyzing a word. One is morphology. You know that the O-L-O-G or the L-O-G-Y in a word means the study of. So if you look at morphology, you know we're talking about the study of something. And in this case, morphology is the study of word formation, or how we make words. Morphemes then are the smallest parts of words that have meaning. Generally, those are prefixes and suffixes, or roots and Latin or Greek roots in a word. So a morpheme is a short segment of language that meets 3 basic criteria. It's a word or part of a word that has meaning. It cannot be divided into smaller parts. And it has relatively the same stable meaning in different verbal environments. That would mean in other languages. Inflectional morphemes are when we add suffixes to the end of base words to change the tense or the number of something. Remember, suffixes are those that come at the end of a word. And all we're doing is either changing the tense or the number by adding ed to make something past tense, or an s or es to change the number of something. When we do this, when we add an inflectional morpheme, we are not changing the meaning of the word. We're also not changing the part of speech. In our example, the word play, to play means to go out and have fun and jump on monkey bars or run around or whatever. If we played yesterday, we still went out, jumped around, and did all this stuff. We just did it in history or a while ago. So we're not changing that word is still a verb when we add past tense ed to that. Same thing with adding the s to make something plural. A pencil and pencils are still a noun. The part of speech does not change. Here's where morphology gets a little more tricky, because we can add derivational morphemes, which are both prefixes and suffixes to words that change pronunciation of the word and the part of speech. And our examples are, the base word would be sign, S-I-G-N, but if we add our suffix, T-U-R-E, we get the word signature. Sign then becomes signature, so we change the pronunciation, and now signature doesn't have quite the same meaning, so the part of speech might be different. Happy, in our second example here, is an adjective that describes something, but if we add ness to it as a suffix, we go from having the descriptive word happy to having happiness, which is a thing, which then becomes a noun. So derivational morphology, again, is the addition of a prefix or a suffix to a base word, which can either be Greek or Latin or just a base word. And these change the pronunciation of a word and the part of speech of that word. This question is a practice question that came from a former student who had taken the Texas exam. She'd taken the EC through 6 test before it became what it is today. So I don't know if this question will ever appear again, but it is something to consider, especially since we're talking about these things right now. On the Texas exam, this question came up. The word predestined is composed of one inflectional morpheme and one derivational morpheme, the root of the word, and 2 inflectional morphemes, and so on. I'll let you read the rest of those. But take a look at this and see if you can decide or choose the best answer to answer that question. Predestined is composed of what? If you need to go back, just scroll back on the scroll bar to look at the definitions of inflectional and derivational morphemes. And if you answered D, you are correct. Predestined contains 3 morphemes, and each of those means something. The first morpheme is the derivational morpheme pre, which means before. The root word is destined, and then the inflectional ending making it past tense or ed. This particularly comes from competency number 10 in the expectations that the state of Texas expects teachers to be able to understand and teach once they are certified teachers in Texas. And that's why this could be a potential type of question you'll see on your certification exam. So when we have students making words, we do a few things. We think about these things as we are working on building words or making words with our students. First, emergent students are going to learn about and start to recognize letter-sound relationships and how then patterns start forming in words. And the example here is if you know how to spell down, you can spell town and brown and clown. And if you notice, all we're doing is changing the beginning of that word. So the student could go from knowing how to spell one word to knowing how to spell 4 just by manipulating the first couple of letters in word. Students learn how to change just one letter or sequence and how that changes a whole word. By starting with short, easy words and ending with a big word using all the letters, the lessons provide practice for the struggling learners and a challenge for all. Building words builds on phonemic awareness. And students transfer knowledge to word sorts in follow-up activities. So whatever you're teaching them and showing them how to manipulate letters and sounds and looking at parts of words and understanding that morphemes have meaning and such. Students start building on their word knowledge, which then lends to vocabulary and comprehending what words mean. Therefore, students become better learners, better comprehenders. There are a couple of texts that are great resources for you to have in your classroom. If you're going to be teaching elementary school, you're likely going to be very heavily involved in guided reading lessons, and making words might be something that you do with your students at their specific spelling stages. There's a video here for you to watch to see students building words and participating in word sorts. Here on this YouTube link. There's a website called wordplace.com that you could check out. And then Patricia Cunningham is kind of the guru of textbooks and making words research. She's got some great resources out there for teachers. A couple of them are listed here on the page for you to check out if you need to. Your Words Their Way textbook is also an extremely good resource for you if you are going to be participating in word studies. Lastly, good teachers are aware of the need for drawing children's attention to words and letter combinations. At the same time, there's no substitute for children's own reading of real books and their own questions about how words work. I take this to mean that Mr. Booth is saying that we can teach kids letters and how they sound and how they come together to make words, but we have to give kids time to jump into something they're interested in reading-wise so that they can sit and look at these words themselves and work on the teaching that you've given them themselves while they're reading. The pictures you see here are of my nephew, Jeffrey, who's in first grade at a Spanish immersion school in Baton Rouge. And Jeffrey, his mom picked up this book, a series called Dog Man. And he's not been the greatest. He likes to be a clown, this little one, and he's adorable and he gets away with it. So his teachers have never really spoken very highly of his academics, but my sister got him a book and he has absorbed it. He loves it. He likes to stay up late at night, refuses to go to bed because he's not finished reading yet. And it's all because he loves dogs. And it's a comic book style, young reader style book that he can actually see pictures and put letters together to make words. And he's enjoying reading now because he has a good foundation and he's reading something that he's interested in. So now he's got like 8 or 10 of these books because I have sent him as many as I could. And he's just reading all the time. So here's where we want our students to be and the whole purpose for our seminar for today. Thanks for listening. Hope you took some good notes, and I'm excited to show you what a spelling inventory looks like. Hopefully we can get to that soon. Thanks a lot.